Welcome to the Money and Flow podcast, where we're trying to eradicate poverty through financial literacy. Did you know that the health and wellness community is a $600 billion business? And did you also know that women aren't in the forefront when it comes to decision making with our money and our health? We're here to change that. This is the first podcast that specializes in helping women as well as women of color. We focus on health and wellness because it's a cyclical thing, y'all. And without further ado, your host, Eugenie George. You're beautiful. I just want you to know you're my favorite girl. That's kind of the feeling that I've been having the past day. I'm super excited because I've actually been interviewing people, and this is the bonus episode today, which I'm really excited about because we're talking about graduate school or nah, okay? So for some of you that have just tuned in, welcome to the Money and Flow podcast. My name is Eugenie. Sometimes I can become Bougenie. That means that's when I get a little bit extravagant, which is why I sung that song. Funny story, my partner came up with calling me Bougenie because sometimes I can be really cheap. I sometimes enjoy top ramen, but every once in a while, he said I surprise him and I spend a lot of money. But I think that's how it should be. It should be a balance of taking time, spending money on certain things that you love, but then also being sometimes a little bit on the cheap side too. It's good to be frugal. It's good to have a budget, but it's also good to while out. One fun fact is I actually was in my best friend's wedding. So that was the chance that I had to be Bougenie. So unfortunately, I couldn't see Beyonce. So, it's it's a tit for tat. You know what I mean? So, anywho, today in our bonus episode, we're talking about graduate school or nah, okay? Most listeners, we're all in kind of like the same phase. The average age to go into graduate school is around 33. But if you are an overachiever, I know lots of folks that are younger. Most people that I know that have jumped right into graduate school have either been like 25, 26, but there's a huge group of people that are thinking about going to graduate school now. And we're going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of it. So September is the time where many folks start to look for a change. So my last episode, we talked about falling into new habits, new routines. But for many millennials, many women, we start thinking about making decisions to look for new employment or turn to grad school to catapult our careers. We're also going to talk about, is it worth the investment? Some people 100% agree, some people don't. But what you need to know is that whatever choice you make, it's yours, because at the end of the day, you are beautiful. So even if you have a little debt baby, that's okay. It's all good. Like, having debt is very normal, but we're going to talk about sort of the pros and cons behind it. Okay. So what you need to remember, because I know this sounds really crazy and sometimes it seems really basic, but the most important thing to remember is that graduate school is a pure investment. You are telling the world, hey, I invest in myself. I believe in myself. I am a responsible individual, and I overall want to improve my life. I want to get really specific or really broad in a topic. I might decide to do anthropology, or I might decide to become an MBA student, or I might go into public policy. Going to grad school is incredibly important, but it's also you telling the world that you matter, right? You yourself are taking your time out. You're taking a very small chunk of your life, but you're also taking that time out to try to invest in yourself and better yourself. So I think for some reason we forget that. We don't think of going to grad school sometimes like a huge investment, because we actually put more weight on purchasing a car, or sometimes we put more weight into buying a house. But honestly, my car note, the percentage of me paying or the interest is 1%, and my student loans are 6%, y'all. So really think about that this is a budget. And I'll talk about my story a little bit later. But yeah, for some reason we forget about that, and we take this huge plunge and decrease pay for around 1 to 6 years of our life to become grad students. So that's one thing. I know some of you guys are like, "Why, girl? I already knew that." But it's repetition is key. I say that every time I'm on the podcast. Sometimes we have to hear it over and over again to really manifest our dreams or to really have an actionable step. What's really interesting is that in the limelight, there has been a lot of slack about folks attending grad school. The argument against graduate school is that we're dipping into a $1 trillion bucket of despair. And most of you know we have a person that is over the Department of Education, and I'm not saying that she's not the most qualified, but there's a lot of crazy things that are happening. But the good news is that the IRS just said that companies, instead of investing in your 401k, you can put your 401k costs towards paying off your school debt. So I love that. So yes, there's a lot of like bad stuff going on in how much debt we have, but also I want you to know that there are some positive things happening. So, for some of us, we do have the privilege of our jobs paying for school, but for most of us, we leap into graduate school without really knowing how it's going to benefit us. One of the negatives that most graduate schools give you is a whopping $60,000 debt or more. So I've said this before, if you already have a debt baby, you really need to think about your actions, okay? Your parents did not have the same scenario. Most people's grad schools 20 years ago was 10 grand. That is not as much as inflation is mad crazy. I mean, that is one of the things that I love about if you work with a CFP or a financial advisor. They actually show you step by step of how to pay back your debt or how to build up for a college fund. But people don't realize that every year inflation goes up. So graduate school, the inflation for graduate school is higher than the CPI average, which is the Consumer Price Index average. For the most part, because of the crazy stock market after 2008, the Federal Reserve they monitor the CPI. So for right now, the CPI is around 2 to 3%. And for student loans, it's 6%. So really think about this investment that you're making. I'm not saying don't do it, because I'm going to tell y'all, I'm in grad school right now, and I'll talk to you guys about that soon. But I want you to really think about those things, okay? So I every time I think about that, about the debt baby and how we need to think about our actions, we don't talk about school debt. We think of it as a rite of passage, and that doesn't necessarily have to be. So think about what you want and how you want to pay back your debt. So the next thing that I want to talk to you about, which is my story, is I always call it to be Eugene or Bougene. And I 100% agree if you're one of those folks that really want to go to graduate school because you want to better yourself. You want to launch into a different world. You want to raise your social capital. It makes a lot of sense. And I used to be one of those people too. When I was 25, I took every GMAT course. I attended every graduate school meeting. And y'all know I was there for the prestige, but I was also there because grad school meetups were my Tinder. I couldn't tell you, it's not like I was dating all crazy, but it was very strategic, just like going to grad school. I was like, oh, you know what? This guy, he looks like he's trying to get an MBA. That's what's up. This person looks like they're trying to get a degree in anthropology. Yeah, that's what it was, okay? So it was very strategic. I've always wanted to go to business school ever since I wore my first blazer. So at the time, I wanted to be bougie, okay? And in all honesty, I was 25. I really thought that I knew what I wanted, but I had no clue. And for the most part, I spent days and hours studying how I didn't really think about how it was going to benefit my life. So I actually gave up that dream and paid off my student loans. And I don't know why at the time I was so focused on graduate school. I will say probably the reason why is because I did go to I was in a strategic program, and the program, most people went into graduate school. So I felt like there was a lot of pressure. My roommate at the time was in graduate school. Most people that I knew were in graduate school. So I felt like I had to have this pressure. But I'm really happy that I didn't, because I paid off my student loans, just finished paying them off at 30, and it was completely worth it. It was completely worth it just letting it go, because I was able to be around people. I was able to love on people, but also recognizing that graduate school is not for everyone, and it's not for everyone at the time that they think it's for. I think some of times we forget that delay is not denial. Sometimes we always want to have an instant gratification, but sometimes waiting is the best thing, okay? If I hurried and rushed and jumped into marrying my previous boyfriend, I think I would be in a very different state right now. I don't think I would have started a business. I don't think I would have thought about anything. I think when we're really young, and being 30 is still also very young in your 30s, we're just immediate, like, how can I make things go quicker? And it just doesn't work like that. You cannot achieve mastery until you have to sit through it. So I gave up my focus of graduate school, paid off the student loans, and I honestly was really ashamed that I didn't go to Yale or Harvard, which sounds crazy because y'all are like, what? That's ridiculous. But I was really ashamed because every single person that I knew was going to grad school. So how can I not feel ashamed? And that guilt, some of you guys might be feeling the same way. That guilt is very, very real. We are so focused on impressing people that we do not focus on ourselves, and we lose fact of it. And so when we feel normal or authentic, a lot of that time is we feel like an imposter, which is crazy. So when I was 25, 26, I just didn't really know, because I thought that's all I wanted. I thought that that's what I was supposed to do. And for many of us, that's called a quarter life crisis. For some of us, that's called return of Saturn, whatever you want to call it. But it was something that really affected me in a very negative way. But I'm so glad that I paid off school, because I knew personally that I wanted to, quote unquote, break my family's generational curse. And I know some of y'all are probably thinking like, what are you talking about? But there's a thing in Black families, and I'm pretty sure in Latino families, where people talk about generational curses. And it's very normal. And people talk about it all the time. And my family is devout Christian. So I remember being at church and people talking about breaking generational curses. And I didn't know what that meant. I had no clue what they were talking about. But I was up there in church like, yes, that's what I'm trying to do. Trying to live better than my ancestors. What? But not really understanding what that meant. In my mind, breaking a generational curse is meaning looking at your family's past, analyzing it, talking to people, recognizing different experiences, and changing those parts of your family, embracing them, but also changing and becoming a new person. And for my family, debt was being in debt would hurt my family very much. And some of you guys may be feeling the same way, but I remember literally walking outside. One of my relatives told me to walk outside and look on the floor, and on the floor there was $100 bill. And they were like, thank God, like our family's generational curse is broken. That's not how it's supposed to be. In order to break a generational curse, we're supposed to be teaching and living by an example. And for some of you might be saying, this is really crazy. It's a little bit too woo-woo. That's fine. But what you need to know is each of us have that. We all have these crazy, ancestral things in our past that we have to break through. And it really is up to us to think about how do we want our families and our kids to live in a better world. And one of those things is financial literacy, financial freedom. Am I the best right now? No. Okay. Do I am I someone that's like this crazy investor? No, but I'm manifesting it right now. I'm living, I'm planning, I'm future planning to do that. So I want you guys to really think about, like, when you're thinking about your family's generational curse, what was that? How did that affect you? You know, one of my favorite there was a PBS documentary a while ago. I have to figure out what it was, but they talked about how Jewish families, how the daughters of the Holocaust, soon as when they had kids, their granddaughters were experiencing the same type of drama that their grandmothers were having, like the stress, the anxiety, everything. All of that was and there's tons of scientific studies behind it. But yes, if we don't correct that and we don't understand what's happening in our past, then we are more likely to carry that on. And I know right now some of it seems really far-fetched, but we got to push there. You have to think to yourself, like, literally 20 years ago, they were still doing psychological tests on African American boys and injecting them with hormones that weren't healthy, right? So it wasn't that long ago. Even I'm probably wouldn't be sure. I mean, I'm pretty sure even right now there's stuff that's going on and we're not aware of it. So thinking about my generational curse, thinking about your generational curse, that's when you start have to really thinking about, why do you want to go to grad school? Why is grad school so important to you? Okay. Now I want to say that I am a graduate student, and I think this is the best decision, best timing that I ever could have had, because the circumstances fell into my lap and I was able to go. It just so happened that my mother started working at a graduate school. So I was able to apply for it, get in, because I had already taken the test and already had the grades. And now I'm leaving with $21,000 or $27,000 in debt, which is a lot less than the national average. But I waited for 6 years, y'all. I didn't jump into it. I waited. So that's not to say that if you're already in graduate school, that's fine. But you have to really think about, especially if you're in grad school right now, what is this going to do and how this is going to help your career? Because it can definitely help your career. It can definitely help what you want, but you have to really be strategic about it. Now, for some of you, I know a lot of business owners or people that want to have a business or a side hustle. I mean, 50% of Americans or millennials have side hustles. So it makes a lot of sense. But I want to let you know that grad school is not going to help you build a business, period. Okay? And I know you're thinking, what? Yes, the grad school is not going to help you build your business. And many entrepreneurs disagree with graduate school, and I actually do agree with them, because only 3% of businesses, even the schools that say School of Entrepreneurship, blah blah blah, are founded by executives, which is not a bad thing, but only 3% of new businesses start out in grad school. That's a really small percentage considering how many people are jumping in for debt. So if you have a business or you're thinking about a side hustle, maybe you shouldn't go. Or if you're thinking about going and you're thinking about starting a business, the best example, and I'll make sure I put this in the show notes, is Warby Parker. So some of y'all know Warby Parker, but I wear Warby Parkers every day. One, because they are from Philly, but two, because they have affordable glasses for everyone. And they started their business while they were in school. They were literally shipping glasses while they were in school. So there's only 3%. So you need to think, are you going to be a part of the 3% or are you going to not? Okay, so now that we're thinking about where do we go, we're thinking about applying to grad schools, what do we do? Well, there are a couple of options that you should really take into consideration. One, take into consideration how much student loans you have. Now, I had Ashley Hill on the podcast, and she does college prep ready, and she probably would be a good person to chat with to help you pay down your student debt while you're still in school. Another person I could recommend is Sonia Lewis, who is the student loan doctor. She also has a great podcast, very funny. She's such a good person. I met her a couple of years ago, but yeah, she has a podcast as well. Those would be kind of the first two folks I would recommend you to. They going to one of these business owners or the student loan doctor or Ashley Hill, that might be a good way to start thinking about, okay, I need scholarships. I want to pay off my old student debt. Like, what should I do? If you're already in grad school, there is a great, or especially if you're trying to get your MBA, the Forte Institute or the Forte Foundation is a great place to start, because they also can help you understand which path you want to go on for your MBA. Now, if you're pre-med or pre-law, I'm going to make sure I find some folks for you. But what I would say with that is, from prior to being around certain folks, like my best friend Whitney, shout outs to Whitney, and my other best friend Crystal, both of them are it passed the bar already, and then the other person is in medical school, and a lot of their student loans were paid for because they planned ahead. Particularly with one of my friends, she really hustled and researched the heck out of which schools and colleges will pay a huge chunk of your school debt. And fortunately, she does not have that much debt to take out. And I'm pretty sure, knowing her, she's going to pay it all off pretty quickly. So those are some two folks that I would definitely, I don't have an expert yet, but if you know of an expert that is, specializes in law or medical school, please let me know. My email is moneyandflowpodcast@gmail.com. So that's also one of the things that I would recommend. Okay, so you're thinking about grad school, yeah or nah, but you're moving towards that path. So when you're thinking about taking your test or your exam that has to do with your GMAT or your GRE or your MCAT, all of that takes time too. So you have to think about, how much time do I have to spend within a week? How much time do I have to even study? Sometimes you're actually going to lose some friends because they're not going to understand why you're studying so much. When I took my GMAT, unfortunately, I did have to let a couple of friends go because they just didn't get it. And every time I even attempted to reason with them, it just didn't even work out well. So that is something you have to think about as well. Like taking time out, even making the decision to go to grad school, you have to kind of think differently. You have to budget differently. And that's pretty much it for this special bonus podcast. Make sure you like us, subscribe to the podcast. Would love to hear from you. And then also, if you have any requests, please give me a shout out. November and December is going to kind of be our credit series, where we're talking about building credit and what that really means, particularly with women of color. I found this really crazy, but really sad statistic recently where it said that Latinos as well as African Americans' wealth dropped after the recession 61%. So credit has to do